Hey everyone. I want to share something very personal today, something I've never told anyone in real life. It's a little embarrassing, but it's one of those memories that sticks with you. A guilty pleasure, if you will. It doesn't really fit the story I usually tell about myself, but maybe that's why I've kept it hidden. I'm hoping that by sharing it here, I can finally say it out loud and maybe even laugh about it someday. So, this happened about a year ago during a work trip. I travel a few times a year for my job, but this trip was special because it was to a city I'd never been to before. The kind of place that feels new and exciting, but also a little intimidating when you're there alone. My hotel was nothing fancy, just a standard place downtown with all the basic amenities. I spent the days in meetings, presentations, and networking events. You know, the usual stuff that drains you but is important for work. The evenings, though, were mostly quiet. I didn't really know anyone in the city, and being naturally shy, I mostly kept to myself. But one evening, after a particularly long day, I decided to do something different. Instead of going straight to my room, I went down to the hotel's lounge bar. I wasn't expecting much, just a quiet drink to unwind before calling it a night. As I sat there with my drink, I noticed someone else at the bar. They had this energy that was impossible to ignore, confident, warm, funny without trying too hard. It caught me off guard because I usually keep to myself in situations like that. But somehow, I felt drawn to them. And that's where everything changed. I've always been pretty shy and cautious, especially when it comes to meeting new people or dating. So, I was surprised when I found myself smiling and eventually saying hi. We started talking, and to my surprise, the conversation flowed effortlessly. We chatted about everything, work, travel, the funny and awkward moments of life. It felt so natural and lighthearted, like reconnecting with an old friend rather than making small talk with a stranger. I don't remember exactly how long we talked, but it felt like hours had passed. The way they listened and responded made me feel comfortable and understood in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. There was no pressure, no awkwardness, just genuine connection. After a while, they mentioned a karaoke place nearby and suggested we go. Normally, karaoke terrifies me. I'm not a singer, and the idea of performing makes me want to disappear. But there was something about their enthusiasm and the way they made me feel safe that made me say yes. We left the bar and walked to this little karaoke spot. It was cozy, with neon lights and a small stage. Neither of us were great singers, but we decided to just have fun and not take it seriously. We picked cheesy songs, sang loudly and off-key, and laughed at our own terrible performances. That night felt like a little escape, a break from routine and expectations. I realized how much I'd missed just letting go and being silly. The karaoke room was small, but it was the perfect place to be goofy and uninhibited. We danced, sang, and joked around like kids. The music was loud, and nobody else was there, so it felt safe to be ourselves. We sang everything from classic pop hits to ridiculous love songs. Every bad note and missed beat made us laugh harder. I wasn't self-conscious at all, which is a huge deal for me. The more we sang and joked, the more relaxed I became. I realized I didn't have to be perfect or guarded. I could just enjoy the moment and the company. At one point, we took a break and just sat quietly, sharing stories about our lives. I felt this strange sense of peace and happiness that surprised me. When it was finally time to leave, neither of us wanted the night to end. The city was calm and quiet, the streets softly lit by street lamps. We walked back to the hotel, still chatting and laughing. Back at the hotel lounge, we found a quiet corner with some comfy chairs. The atmosphere was cozy, and the conversation took on a more personal tone. There was a subtle shift, the kind you don't always notice right away. A glance, a smile that lingers, a touch on the arm. It was flirty, but gentle. Nothing rushed or forced. For someone like me, who's usually reserved, it felt like stepping into unknown territory. But it was exciting rather than scary. We talked about what we wanted and didn't want, no pressure. No expectations, just honesty. It was refreshing. That's when I realized that this night was different. This wasn't just a fun outing. It was something more. Eventually, we went to my room. I won't go into all the details because this story isn't about explicit moments. But what I will say is that it was one of the most comfortable and sweet experiences I've had. There was no awkwardness, no rush, no stress. Just a quiet connection and a feeling of being truly seen. The next morning, everything felt surreal. We didn't exchange numbers or plan to see each other again. It was a one-time thing, a perfect little memory. Since then, I've thought about that night a lot. It's a guilty pleasure because it's so out of character for me. I'm usually cautious, private, and keep things orderly. But that night taught me a lot. It reminded me how important it is to let go sometimes. To embrace spontaneity. To enjoy connection without overthinking. I don't regret a single moment. It was unexpected, simple, and beautiful. I'll probably never tell anyone this in person because it feels too personal. But I wanted to share it here because sometimes, the little things are the most meaningful. Thanks for listening to my story. Story 2. Hey Reddit. This is something I've never shared with anyone. Not my best friend, not my therapist, not even the group chat. But it's one of those memories that pops into my head sometimes, and I smile to myself, then immediately shake it off like, nope. That didn't happen. That was just a dream or something. Except it wasn't. About 8 months ago, I took a weekend trip to a mountain town a few hours from where I live. I was supposed to go with my sister, but she bailed last minute due to a work emergency. I thought about canceling too, but I really needed a break. Between my stressful job and my recent breakup, I was emotionally drained and overdue for some peace and quiet. So, I went alone. I packed a good book, some wine, and enough cozy sweaters to last me a week. My Airbnb was a tiny cottage tucked away near a trailhead, and it was every bit as charming as the photos made it look. Stone fireplace, big windows, old creaky floors, the whole storybook vibe. I had no plans other than to sleep, read, and maybe hike a little. I wasn't looking for anything more than rest. But life had different plans. On my second day there, I decided to take a morning hike. The trail started just a few feet from my door, winding up into the forest with views of the valley below. It was misty and cold, but beautiful. The kind of cold that wakes you up and makes you feel alive. I hadn't seen a single soul on the trail for almost an hour when I stopped at a lookout to catch my breath. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I stiffened. I was alone. My phone had 1 bar of signal. Worst-case scenarios flashed through my brain, but when I turned around, I saw a guy around my age, mid-30s, maybe, smiling as he approached. He looked like a local, rugged boots, wool jacket, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He nodded politely and said something like, "Didn't expect to see anyone else up here this early." I smiled back, keeping my responses short but friendly. We ended up chatting a bit, mostly about the view, the trail conditions, and the cold. He introduced himself as Mark, and I told him my name. After a few minutes, he asked if I wanted to hike the next section of the trail with him. Normally, I'd say no. But something about his vibe made me feel oddly safe. So, I said yes. And that was the beginning of something I still can't explain. As we walked, the conversation got deeper. We talked about our lives, not in that surface-level way, but the kind where you actually listen and share. He told me he came up to the mountains often to get away from the noise. He was recently divorced and figuring himself out again. I told him about my breakup, about the pressure I felt to always be the strong one in my life. Somehow, in the span of an hour, I felt more emotionally connected to this stranger than I had to people I'd known for years. At one point, we stopped at another lookout point, this one with a little bench carved into the rock. We sat down, and there was a long pause, not awkward, just quiet. Peaceful. I remember turning to look at him and realizing how handsome he was. Not model perfect, but warm and real. The kind of handsome that sneaks up on you. He looked back at me and said, "I'm really glad I ran into you today." And then, just like that, we kissed. It was soft, careful, Like we were both asking, is this okay? And the answer, without words, was yes. I hadn't kissed anyone in months. I hadn't even thought about intimacy. But this felt so right. So natural. We didn't go any further on the trail. We walked back together, slowly, talking and laughing like old friends. When we got to my cabin, I expected him to say goodbye and leave. But he didn't. We stood outside for a minute, not sure what to say. Then I heard myself ask, "Do you want to come in for some coffee?" He smiled. "I'd love that." I made coffee while he added firewood to the fireplace. We sat on the floor, wrapped in blankets, sipping our drinks and watching the flames. I didn't feel awkward. I didn't feel judged. I felt safe. Eventually, we kissed again. This time deeper, slower, more certain. We moved to the couch, still wrapped in the same blanket. Everything that happened next was completely consensual, gentle, and honestly really beautiful. There was nothing rough or rushed. Just two people who had found something unexpectedly kind in each other. Afterward, we didn't talk much. We just lay there. It wasn't awkward silence, it was comfortable. Like we both knew this moment existed in its own little bubble. That night, he stayed over. We talked more in the dark, shared stories we'd never told anyone else. I told him things I hadn't said out loud before. He did the same. I didn't even realize I was crying a little until he brushed the tear from my cheek. The next morning, we made breakfast together. Pancakes and coffee. We were both quiet, but not in a sad way. Just present. Like we knew this moment mattered. We walked down to his car together. He was parked a little further down the road, near the public trail entrance. Before he left, he hugged me. A long, real hug, the kind that says more than words can. "I'm glad I met you," he said. "Me too." We didn't exchange numbers. No social media. No promises. And that felt right. It wasn't about turning this into something long-term. It was about the magic of that moment, something fleeting, but full. I've never told anyone about that weekend. Not because I'm ashamed, but because it feels like a secret that belongs to just me. A guilty pleasure, maybe, but one that reminded me I was still alive. Still lovable. Still capable of connection, even when I least expected it. Sometimes I think about him. I wonder if he thinks about me, too. But mostly, I just carry that memory like a little ember. Quiet, warm, and mine alone.